We're here with Susan Navarre at the Historic Society. Can you tell us when Fitchburg was established or when it was started? Tell us a little.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Fitchburg first became a town in 1764, and it split off from Lunenburg. If you drive around in Fitchburg and Lunenburg, you'll realize that with the big hills in Fitchburg, that if you had to walk all the way from the furthest point in Fitchburg to the downtown in Lunenburg, that it's a huge walk. So some of the people that lived out in farms out here decided they wanted to be an independent town so that you could have a local church and have all of your town business taken care of here. So it's only a little over 10 years before the American Revolution. So that's relatively late in Massachusetts history. And some historians have written about that, about how the coasts were settled earlier and the Connecticut River Valley was settled earlier. But this area was a little more rugged with its hills, and so it was only settled, thickly settled a little bit later. It's on the Nashua River, which is part of the Merrimack Rivershed, and that means that when the Industrial Revolution came to the United States, boom, Fitchburg was in the perfect place to have lots and lots of river power.
And since you had river power, did you have lots of mills?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, when we're here in the Historical Society, we're just across the street from the place that had one of the first textile mills in Fitchburg that dated from 1807. So that's very early, very, very early.
And what did these mills do? What did they produce?
Well, that's what's unusual about Fitchburg, is that it has never been a one industry town. Early on in the early 1800s, it had textile mills, and as they developed by about 1815 or so, there were new inventions by local people that made them fully automated. So you'd have cotton and wool textiles. But at the same time, the city was developing all sorts of industries that were what we would call today business to business industries. So there were a lot of metalworking plants, iron and steel. Ultimately, there was brass foundries, but all sorts of foundries. And they were making products that you would use in a factory to make other things. So they were making engines and parts for looms, metal parts for looms, ball bearings, all sorts of things like that. Later, in addition to textiles, there was a paper industry that developed, and by the 20th century, it became very much a paper industry town. A lot of the earlier mills were taken over from that. But there was furniture, there were armaments, things like guns, which one of the gun manufacturers became a famous bicycle and sporting goods manufacturer. There was a lot of publications because of the paper, I think, and because of its placement on a number, at the crossroads of a number of communications sites, and not too far from Boston, 50 miles from Boston.
Okay.
So it was a place where you could go to get books and newspapers, magazines, and ultimately they manufactured and published the books, the newspapers, and the magazines. So we've got all that. And then 20th century, and even before the 20th century, it was an important commercial district. People from all around in this area, and even places in southern New Hampshire were considered suburbs of Fitchburg.
No.
Yeah, and you'd come down here to do your purchasing of things that weren't available elsewhere. So that has really shaped it even into the 20th century, that it was a major industrial powerhouse during the Second World War. Many of the men in the area didn't go off to fight at war because they were skilled workers in all the different mills here. There was a huge population that did go off to fight at war, especially from the French, Canadian, and Italian communities, and the Finns quite a bit. They were hoping to become American citizens, and they just believed in going and fighting in the war. But so it was a major center for industrial production during the war, and then in the 50s and 60s. And in many ways, when other cities had problems because they only had one industry and it moved away. So, and that happened here too for the textiles. In the 1920s and 30s, they moved to the south, to Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. But there were all these other industries here. They pretty much, things moved in to take over those factories right away. So it was really not until the 80s and 90s that some of the factories in the area started emptying and closing. Some in the 70s and some more recently. But there are still active factories here.
There are.
Yes, but if you look at the records in, say, when some of your viewers were children in the 50s and 60s, 300,000 people worked in Fitchburg.
Wow.
Or were in the city, yeah.
That's
it's sort
a
of
lot.
extraordinary.
Yeah,
Yeah, this is a
that's a
city
lot.
of 45,000 people, and it had all these other people coming in to work at all the different factories, to work at the downtown, to work at the millions of companies that were here. And now it's transitioned a little bit that there are still factories, but many of those factories have been turned into condominiums, smaller business, other homes. Some have been lost to fire or taken down. But it's a little bit more of a bedroom community, and people go outwards
I was
to
gonna
work.
ask.
When people are visiting, there are a number of historic districts, and there are a number of resources online, as well as things like brochures that we have here, that give you a sense of the places that you can walk around in Fitchburg. I mentioned that I thought that Fitchburg was very unique. It's got this great combination of being a moderately small city with a lot of education in it. Fitchburg State University is the first normal school in Massachusetts, so it's been educating educators for over 100 years. And a number of different things that it was oriented towards learning and innovation. And so there were so many things that people would come here and they would try out something new.
Before I forget, I
Yeah.
have to hear about the pink flamingos.
Oh, certainly, certainly. So yeah, I have actually met Don Featherstone, who designed them. He is he's sort of a unique man, very creative. One of those people that is just so creative that he loves all of the things that he does, and it was really something of a brainstorm to come up with the pink flamingo specifically. So he was designing a number of different decorations that people could have easily and cheaply because they were made out of plastic. And so he designed, his first really successful one was a goose that lighted up. And they made ones that lighted up. There's some Disney movie that had a pink flamingo character, and its name was Featherstone, and that was in homage to Don. Yeah, they call a machine gun in England a Maxim gun, and actually named after Hiram Maxim, who worked here, came here, was an innovator in making ether available to doctors. People who are engineers all know the Burley drill, which was used to, yes, it was used to help build the Brooklyn Bridge and many other things. It's the first use. So Mr. Burley was from Fitchburg. He was working with Alva Crocker, who we have a painting of him that you could see, in order to build the Hoosick Tunnel in Western Mass. And so they used it there. That was the first place that they were able to tunnel through using this innovative design of drills. Alan Priest, who was the first curator of Asian art, he really founded the Asian art collection at the Metropolitan Museum in New York City, is from here. And he actually grew up just across the street where his family owned a lumber yard.
When did it become a city?
Oh, it became a city in the 1870s, in 1873. Same date that it was founded, as I recall. It had grown really substantially. It was very, very active both in abolition during the Civil War and also as a manufacturing center in the Civil War.
Don't you have a park or something?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
it's one of the it's a really beautiful space, Monument Park on Main Street.
On Main Street, yes.
And it has actually one of the earliest sculptures for the Civil War, and it was by a very important sculptor, Martin Milmore, who was an Irish immigrant who moved to Boston, and you see some of his work in Boston. And he died very young in his mid-30s. So this is an extraordinary work of his that's on view in Fitchburg.
Okay. Well, maybe we should take a walk and see what you have around here.
Okay. Oscar Tokoi, he was the first president of a free Finland. So I always say president, premier of Finland. So the Finns were under the control of the Russian Empire. It's
Fitch.
Yes, after John Fitch. It's interesting because I was told by a local historian that they anticipated that he would become the wealthiest man in town. And so they were mainly giving it this name so that he would really care deeply about the community. But then that didn't happen.